Nothing in the grass moved except the flies. The cub lay on his side where the green thinned into dust, ribs lifting in short uneven pulls that barely stirred the fur along his flank. One hind leg was caught beneath him at an angle that did not belong to rest or sleep, the paw turned inward, toes slack. His ears twitched once, then stilled, and the small sound that escaped his chest faded back into the heat. Around him, the air felt suspended, as if the land itself were waiting to decide whether he would remain. The man did not hurry. He came forward a step at a time, weight placed carefully, reading the ground before committing to it. His eyes searched the grass for signs that were not there, the shadow of a lioness, the tension of watchful movement. He knew the danger of assuming absence. Cubs were rarely alone without reason. Yet the silence pressed in without warning growls or distant calls, and the flies continued their patient orbit. The dog stayed close to his leg, head low, tail still. She did not bark or pull forward. Her nose lifted and lowered, sorting the scents that hung over the cub like a thin veil. When the man paused, she paused too, sensing the brittle edge of the moment. There was no alarm in her posture, only attention, the quiet alertness reserved for things that might break if touched too soon. Closer now, the man could see the tremor in the cub's breathing, the faint shudder that traveled through his shoulders and stopped. Dust clung to the fur around his mouth. One eye opened briefly, unfocused, then closed again as though the effort cost more than it returned. The leg beneath him did not move. It lay pinned by his own weight, twisted in a way that spoke of a fall or a sudden strike he had not outrun. The man lowered himself slowly, keeping his body turned sideways, smaller. He did not reach out. He waited for the cub's chest to rise again, counted the seconds between breaths, watched for any sign that a mother might be near enough to hear. The grass whispered once in the distance and then settled. No answering sound came. "It's okay," he said, barely above breath. The words meant less for comfort than for steadiness. The dog exhaled softly, a sound that was almost a sigh, and sat. The cub stirred at the sound, not lifting his head, only shifting his jaw against the ground. His tail gave a weak flick and fell still. Flies scattered and returned. The heat pressed down, drawing moisture from everything that lived beneath it. Time stretched thin, each moment weighted by the risk of staying and the danger of leaving. The man reached at last, fingers brushing the cub's shoulder with a touch so light it barely disturbed the fur. The skin was hot, tight over bone. The cub did not pull away, did not lean in. He only breathed, shallow and uneven, holding himself where pain had placed him. The dog edged closer, her nose hovering, then retreating, careful not to crowd. Above them, the wind moved through the grass in a low, passing ripple. Somewhere far off, something alive shifted and continued on its way. Here, at the edge of the grass, the cub lay between motion and stillness, and the day held its breath with him. Light thinned slowly and the flies drifted higher, while the grass bent and straightened, and the cub's breath, faint but present, stayed with night approaching nearby quietly. The dog did not advance. She eased herself down into the dust, folding her legs beneath her with deliberate care, her body angled slightly away from the cub. Her head remained lifted, eyes soft, unblinking, watching without intent. The movement was unremarkable in its simplicity, but it changed the shape of the space between them. Where there had been tension, there was now a quiet offering of stillness. The cub reacted almost imperceptibly. His breathing caught once, then resumed, slower than before. One ear twitched toward the dog, tracking the faint sound of her settling. His eye opened again, this time holding for a second longer, dark and glassy, unfocused yet aware. He did not lift his head. He did not retreat. But the line of his spine softened slightly, the rigid brace easing as though his body had registered something unfamiliar but not threatening. The man noticed the shift immediately. He had seen fear before, sudden and explosive, and he had seen the frozen withdrawal of animals pushed too far. This was neither. This was attention without panic. The dog remained where she was, breathing slow, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that did not press for response. She did not stare. She did not move closer. Her presence was simply there, steady and readable. A fly landed briefly near the cub's eye. He blinked it away with a sluggish motion, then let his gaze drift back toward the dog. His whiskers quivered faintly. The tip of his tail lifted a fraction from the ground and dropped again. It was not strength returning. It was acknowledgement. The man stayed silent. He shifted his weight slightly, careful not to break the fragile balance forming in the air. He had learned long ago that trust rarely arrived through action. It settled in through restraint. The dog's posture, low and unassuming, was doing more than any careful step or practiced movement ever could. She was not a handler. She was not a threat. She was simply another living body choosing calm. He watched the cub's breathing deepen by a narrow margin. Each inhale still trembled, but the pauses between them grew less jagged. The twisted hind leg remained unmoved, pain holding it in place, yet the cub's front paw flexed once against the soil, claws barely visible before slipping back beneath fur. Dust clung to the pads. His chest rose again. Good, the man murmured, not as praise but as confirmation. The dog's ear flicked at the sound, but she did not lift her head. The grass shifted softly as a breeze passed through, brushing along the cub's back. He flinched at first, then settled, his body adjusting rather than recoiling. The flies thinned as the air moved. The world, which had felt suspended, began to inch forward again. The man understood then that the dog's stillness was not passive. It was an invitation without demand. In the absence of pressure, the cub was allowed to remain where he was, injured and exhausted, without needing to defend that state. Nothing was being taken from him. Nothing was being forced. The cub's eye closed once more, but his head angled slightly toward the dog as it did. His breathing continued, shallow yet steady enough to count. The dog shifted her weight minimally, redistributing it to remain comfortable, and resumed her quiet watch. As the light softened and stretched across the grass, the moment held. Wind moved through the stems in slow waves, bending them and letting them rise again. Somewhere beyond sight, life continued its ordinary patterns. At the edge of the tall grass, three beings remained in stillness, the day lowering around them, trust forming not as an act but as a shared pause. The first track appeared just beyond the flattened grass, pressed deep into the soil where weight had shifted and turned. It was wide, clean-edged, the imprint of pads and claws still sharp despite the heat. Another followed, then another, moving in a slow arc that circled back toward the cub's position. They had not been there before or had gone unnoticed in the earlier stillness. Now they stood out with sudden clarity, undeniable in what they suggested. The man felt the change settle into his body before he named it. The cub had not been left. He had been lost or forced down by injury, separated in a moment that had not yet finished unfolding. The ground carried the story plainly enough. A lioness had passed through recently, searching, turning back, lingering longer than chance would allow. He did not look up right away. His eyes traced the direction of the tracks, the spacing between them, the subtle drag marks where grass had been brushed aside. The air seemed thicker now, as if holding sound in reserve. Somewhere beyond the tall stems, something powerful still moved. The dog sensed it too. Her posture changed without rising. Her muscles tightened beneath her fur, not in alarm but readiness. Her ears angled outward, catching more than wind. She did not growl. She did not look to the man for instruction. She remained where she was, grounded, her stillness deepening rather than breaking. The cub stirred again, a weak movement of his shoulders that failed to lift him. His breathing shortened, quickened for a few beats, then slowed as if the effort cost too much. His nose twitched, drawing in scent, the familiar trace of something that belonged to him. His front paw flexed once more, scraping lightly at the dirt. The man straightened slightly, careful not to cast a sudden shape against the grass. His mind measured distance, reaction time, the narrow window between recognition and charge. A returning mother would not pause to assess intent. She would see proximity, vulnerability, and act. He weighed retreat. Stepping back now, withdrawing quietly, leaving the cub where he lay. It was the safer choice for him. It was also the most uncertain for the cub. The injury had pinned him in place, his small body already drained by heat and pain. If the lioness returned and found him alive, she might attempt to move him. She might not. Either way, the next moments would be decisive. The dog shifted her gaze briefly to the man, then back to the grass. She did not move away from the cub. Her presence remained a constant line, unbroken. The cub's breathing steadied again, as though borrowing calm from the stillness around him. His head angled slightly, not toward the tracks, but toward the dog's quiet shape. "Easy," the man said under his breath, the word barely carried on air. He stayed. The decision was not loud or heroic. It settled in the space between breaths. He adjusted his stance to remain balanced, ready to move if needed, but unwilling to abandon the fragile trust already formed. His eyes returned to the cub, noting the faint rise and fall of his chest, the stubborn persistence of that motion despite everything working against it. The tracks waited in the dirt, unchanged. The grass swayed, then stilled. Time stretched thin again, taut with possibility. Somewhere nearby, a mother searched, and here at the edge of the tall grass, a cub held on, breathing shallow but alive, while the dog lay calm beside him and the man stood between choice and consequence, listening as the wind moved softly through the land. The light began to thin without announcement. Color drained slowly from the grass, green dulling into shadow as the heat loosened its grip. The insects quieted first, their hum replaced by a broader hush that rolled in with the evening. Nothing changed quickly, yet everything shifted at once, as though the land were turning a page. She appeared at the edge of sight, not stepping into the open but shaping herself from the grass. Her body was low, controlled, each movement measured. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. Her head lifted just enough for her eyes to clear the stems, fixed on the small form lying where the grass broke into dust. The distance between them remained deliberate. She was close enough to see, far enough to decide. The man felt her presence more than he saw it. The air seemed to tighten, every sound sharpened by awareness. He did not move. His hands stayed open at his sides, his weight evenly placed. He knew that any sudden shift would redraw the scene in ways he could not predict. The dog did nothing. She remained where she had been, her body folded low, chin near the ground. Her breathing stayed slow, steady, visible only in the slight rise and fall of her ribs. Her eyes tracked forward, not locked on the lioness, not avoiding her either. There was no challenge in her posture. No claim. Only stillness. The lioness watched. Her tail flicked once behind her, then stilled. Her ears rotated, catching breath, scent, the layered meanings carried in posture alone. She did not flatten herself to strike. She did not advance. She read. The cub reacted before anyone else moved. At first it was only a shift in his breathing, a soft hitch that deepened into effort. His head lifted a fraction, heavy and unsteady, then dropped back to the ground. A sound left him then, thin and rough, barely more than air shaped by need. It was not loud. It did not carry far. But it was enough. The lioness answered. Her call was low, restrained, not the full sound of command but something older, quieter. It rolled out across the grass and settled over the cub like a hand. At the sound, his body responded without strength, only instinct. His tail twitched weakly. His mouth opened again, shaping a second, smaller reply. His breathing quickened, then steadied, driven now by something beyond pain. The man understood in that instant that nothing he did next would determine the ending. The shape of it had already shifted. This was not a rescue measured by lifting or carrying. It was a crossing back into something that belonged to the cub alone. The dog remained still. She did not look back at the man. She did not rise. Her calm held, unbroken, as if she understood that her role had already been fulfilled. The lioness stepped forward once, then stopped. Her gaze flicked briefly to the man, then to the dog, then returned to the cub. The distance closed only by intention, not by speed. She waited, allowing the space to remain what it was. The man eased backward a single step, then another, slow enough not to ripple the grass. He did not turn. He did not hurry. The dog stayed until he was clear, then shifted just enough to angle her body away, lowering her head further, making herself smaller still. Dusk settled fully then, softening edges, drawing long shadows across the ground. The cub lay breathing, answering each low call with what little voice he had left. The lioness stood watchful, patient, the space between them narrowing not by movement, but by recognition. As the wind moved through the grass, it carried the sound of her call again, and the cub's faint reply followed it, threading through the quiet as the day gave way to night. She moved at last, closing the distance without sound. Her body remained low, her steps deliberate, each placed with care around the stillness of the moment. The cub watched her approach through half-lidded eyes, his head lifting just enough to follow the shape he knew. His breathing faltered once, then steadied again, pulled forward by familiarity rather than strength. She stopped beside him, not touching at first. Her nose lowered, drawing in his scent, confirming what sight had already told her. The cub answered with a soft sound, rough and thin, the effort visible in the tightening of his small body. His tail flicked weakly against the ground. The man did not shift. He felt the weight of her presence press against the space, not as threat but as certainty. This was no longer a question of intervention. It was a passage. The dog stayed where she was, head low, eyes calm. She did not track the lioness with tension or curiosity. Her breathing remained slow, steady, unaltered. Whatever bridge she had formed was already complete. The lioness lowered her head and grasped the cub gently at the scruff of his neck. Her grip was precise, careful around injury, instinct refined by generations of necessity. The cub's body lifted from the ground, his twisted leg hanging at an angle that made the man's breath catch despite himself. The cub did not struggle. He hung limp but alive, trusting the hold that carried him. She paused then. Not long. just long enough for the moment to register fully. Her head turned slightly, eyes lifting toward the man and the dog. There was no softness there, no plea or offering. Only awareness. The acknowledgement of presence, of shared space that would close again behind her. She held the look for a single breath and then turned away. She moved back into the grass, her body swallowing the cub into her shadow. The grass parted, then closed, erasing the line of her passage as though she had never been there. The cub's shape disappeared first, then the curve of her back, then nothing at all but movement fading into stillness. The dog did not follow. She remained seated, posture unchanged, watching the grass settle. Her ears flicked once, catching the last whisper of movement, then relaxed. When the land fell quiet again, she exhaled, a long slow breath, and lowered her chin to the ground. The man stood where he was for several seconds more, listening. There were no calls now. No answering sounds. Only the low hush of evening and the distant life of the plain continuing on its own terms. He stepped back carefully, then turned. The dog rose only when he did, falling into step beside him without a glance behind. They moved away slowly, leaving no mark that would draw attention, no trace that would linger longer than the fading light. As dusk deepened, the sky softened into muted color, and the grass moved gently under the first cool breath of night. Somewhere beyond sight, a mother carried her cub through familiar paths, guided by memory and instinct alone. The man and the dog walked on, the ground firm beneath their feet, carrying with them the quiet weight of a moment that had passed through them without belonging to them at all. The wind bent the grass once more and then let it rise, and the land closed gently around what had been returned to it.